Hi everyone, welcome to Poetry and Talk. Poetry and Talk is a new online interviewing platform for poets to share their poetry, background, and inspiration. We're so delighted that you have checked in with us today. This is our very first episode of Poetry and Talk. Before we get into our first guest poet, I'd just like to mention how grateful we are for the many poets who have expressed an interest in being interviewed with us. We've been scheduling for the for the next couple of months. We have a few openings in November, and we're scheduling into December and early 2021. So stay connected with us for new poet interviews. You can find us on Facebook, on our Facebook page with the same name, Poetry and Talk. I'm Leslie Sue, the host for Poetry and Talk, and I'd like to welcome our very first Poetry and Talk guest poet, Shana Joseph. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you taking the time to help us get to know you and to understand your poetry and what you're all about.
Yep, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. On Poetry and Talk, we like to open with our guest poet to give us a brief introduction of a poem and then to go ahead and read it to us. This way we get a feel and some insight into their poetic style. So Shana, you all set?
Yeah, so the poem I'm going to read today is called Nature's Curse. And it's about basically I how I present myself to the world and how I'm dealing with so many internal battles. And sometimes we meet people and we expect them to kind of just know what we're dealing with and fix them. But other people are also in pain. And the reason why I named it Nature's Curse is because I feel like a lot of the metaphors and a lot of the words I use in the poem had a lot to do with nature and just that style and thinking. And I think nature is something that we all experience. It's in the world. It's here. We all reference Mother Nature at some point in our lives, and that's the point of the poem, is that we're all dealing with something. We're all dealing with some type of pain that we're trying to overcome. Okay, so I'll go into it.
Great.
It is what it is, and it is what it isn't. Again, I have peeled back the layers of myself, showing an alluring nectar to those who dare try to touch me with their hearts. Sharing my scent of nurturing fragrance, I introduce them to Mother Nature. Tasting me on their tongue, my essence dripped from their lips. Never have they met a soul that breathes fire but doesn't burn. I'm an anomaly that they could never forget. Yet, they failed to look deeper to see the uproar fighting within. Green leaves that covered the scars eventually wilted as the seasons changed. People change and distance become the only thing I can expect. It becomes the roots of my existence, and I found a way to find peace in that. Peace from the pattern, peace in realizing that everyone is unpredictable, but me. It's easy to stand still and watch the rest of the world burn. Taking in the view, I see that there's nothing new. Pain lies in each and every one around me, and still we breathe it in. Magnetic burdens pull us toward each other. We are leeching to find comfort in each other's bones. Holding on so tightly, our fingers grow sore, leaving the imprint of bodies in our synapses. We've become refugees seeking a savior, and the same people who ignited the flames, but we don't know any better. We run towards natural disasters, the ones that look like our parents, the ones that remind us of our deeply embedded wounds, the ones that look just like us in the mirror. You may look at me and wonder why my smile is crooked, filled with peaceful bliss, but laced with heart-wrenching circumstance. Know that it is because I have accepted my role here. I am as wondrous as Mother Nature, but I am dying too.
That's really beautiful, Shana.
Thank
Like,
you.
yes, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that with us. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more about that? Is that a current poem? Is that reflective of your style? Can you give us a little bit more into that?
Yeah, it's actually not a new poem. I wrote this poem, I believe, maybe earlier this year or last year, but I think part of what this poem shows, and a lot of my other poetry, it has a lot to do with kind of explaining pain in a different way and trying to relate it to different elements. And I think I definitely write in that style. A lot of my poems tend to deal with fire or water or like just the air, the earth around me. I feel like I'm connected to it in a certain way, and it comes out in my poetry a lot.
Mm-hmm. So you're really connected in with the elements, and you seem to, like you were saying, you write about the different elements, whether it's air, water, fire, or earth.
Mhm. Yep, I do. I mean, I don't know why, because I think for me, elements have always had different meanings to them. Like I look at fire as not something that's just going to burn me, but I look at it as passion. I look at it as something intense. And water, for me, is a very healing element. A lot of my poems have to do with overcoming pain and overcoming some type of trauma or anything internally, and that's why I reference water. And the earth, I'm an earth sign. I'm not sure if anyone knows what that means, but I'm a Virgo, and I think that also relates to why I relate to just the idea of being connected to the earth and what that might mean. So, I mean, I think you can see that if I was able to recite like 5 more poems, you would see some type of consistency in the way that I write.
Mm-hmm. So do you spend a lot of time out in nature, and does that give you the inspiration? Like maybe you're sitting outside by a lake and all of a sudden you're just getting a water vibe and then you want to write about water. Is that how that kind of comes about?
I do like to be in nature, but ironically, it's actually at night that I like to be out. So if I'm taking a walk at night, I tend to, like here in Philadelphia, there's a walkway or like this walk that you can take, and there's a river there. And I tend to, when I'm walking there, I always am drawn to the river. I'm always drawn to the essence of that. We're smaller than what we think. Like we're so small and the world is so big. So I do like being in nature, but not in the sense of I'm going to sit in a day when it's bright and when it's sunny. It's more so at night when I tend to like relate to nature more. And even if I'm not outside, I can kind of visualize it in my head. So I don't need to be outside to write. It just does inspire me.
Mm-hmm. And tell us about when you get inspired. Like, does it just all of a sudden hit you? Or are you actually in the middle of doing something completely unrelated and you're like, wow, I have this really great idea from, and then you get back to it? How do you stay organized with your poetry? Can you share some of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it just does come out of nowhere. It's so weird. Like I can be sitting in a car. Remember one time I wrote this really, really good poem, and I was just sitting in a car and I saw a sign on the highway, and I was like, okay, well, something came up, that came over me and was like, let me write about this. Or if I'm, reading a book or listening to some music, I just I just write. It has to just come to me. It's often very hard for me to force myself to write something if it hasn't come to me. So like some writers, I know that they can set time aside and write, but I'm not like that. It has to come to me first. And I kind of like it better that way because then I really get to just have everything flow out of me differently. It flows easier. It just feels natural to me.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about the creative process when you're actually in that zone, in that space, and you're actually writing a poem. You kind of have a feel for what you're going to write about. One thing I'd like to know is, does it change? Like you maybe have this idea or concept, and then through the creative process, as you're actually writing it, have you ever found that it changes topic or it kind of morphs? And the creative process, like what kind of environment do you like to surround yourself in, if any at all?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with the creative process. I mean, that happens to me all the time. Like something will come to me and I'll start writing about it, and then halfway through writing about it, I switch different lanes, or sometimes I'll just write out everything that comes to my head and then I go back and change things like in that same moment. But this poem is a good example of that. I started the poem more so talking about myself, but then halfway in, I started talking about everyone else around me. So that's an example of how things can change for me. And I have to be alone usually to write. I can't really write in noisy spaces or spaces that have a lot of people. I have to be by myself or kind of in my mind. So a lot of times people don't even see me write. I don't think anyone has really seen me write a poem. I have to do it alone.
Mm-hmm. And how long have you been writing poetry?
Oh, wow. So I'm 24 years old and I started writing poetry when I was like 11 or 12. So in 6th grade, I started to write poetry. And at that time, it wasn't as, it wasn't as full of depth as my poems now, but I think I started it because I was going through a time where I didn't feel like I could express myself. And the thing about, I always said that the pen will never judge me. The paper and pen will never judge me. And, I was able to find a release through that. And I know that people say 12, what could you have been going through? But I just definitely go back. I can remember the very first poem I wrote. Like, that's how much it was significant to me when I started writing poetry.
Mm-hmm. Wow. All right. Let me ask you, um, so different things that you may have experienced, you find a release through your poetry, if it may be like a so-called intense experience or intense observation, your poetry helps you to kind of get your thoughts together and kind of have some like energetic release. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think I'm just a creative person in general. And growing up, I was always drawn to like the idea of expressing yourself without having to actually speak. So that's how I started to write. And then I was also a dancer. So I was always into that fluid, just free form of expression. So for me, even at 24, writing a poem is probably the greatest release I have next to crying.
Mm-hmm. So it's almost like your pen is kind of like a dancing part of you.
Exactly. It is.
Wow.
It's
Wow.
kind of funny because I don't know anyone in my family like that, but you know.
And do you connect with a lot of poets? Is that kind of like, or those that are creative, like, with dance or maybe the visual arts, those into literature, or any of the arts, music, do you like to connect with them a little bit more so?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely love to. In high school, I was in the poetry club. I would surround myself with other poets. And I also find myself always trying to speak to someone who's a more seasoned writer or a seasoned poet just to learn from them. And then another thing I really do like to do is also watch spoken word. I go on YouTube and I just watch spoken word and I get inspiration from that as well. And I mean, I don't dance as frequently as I do now. I mean, as I did then, but I still, if I'm in my apartment, if I'm in my room, I'll still dance just to, feel that freedom that I felt before. So I definitely still find connection to other writers and dance and the arts.
Mhm. Okay, tell us, what else would you like to share so we can get to know you a little bit better? Maybe some areas that we haven't covered yet.
So I'll just talk about my poetry page. It's something that I started on Instagram, and it's at Shana J Poetry. And I'm currently rebranding it, but if you can go to that page now and see a lot of the other shorter poems that I've written. And I'm working on a book, and I think this book, the idea of writing a poetry book came to me in 2017, about 3 years ago, and I wanted to write a book about the transformative like journey that I went through from being someone who was very, very enwrapped in her trauma, her pain, and then becoming a fully merged woman who has now, loved herself in a way that she never has before and has been able to. And I wanted the book to basically show that, from the very first poem to the very last poem, I wanted to show growth and I wanted to show that there's a climb in life. And through my poetry, I wanted to express that. So that book, I'm still working on it, but I'm currently in the editing stages. So hopefully things will be moving forward with that. Um, I do spoken word as well. Actually, I've done that a few times. It's a little nerve wracking because I don't know if you can relate to this, but sometimes when you write, you're nervous because you don't, you're writing something that's personal to you. You're writing something that came from, within you, and you don't want someone to judge it or misinterpret or think that what you wrote isn't important. Like, for me, that's just what I go through. But I do spoken word as well, and I do have some videos on my poetry page for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Shana, let me ask you, have you ever had a situation where you were really inspired and you had some ideas kind of floating around, and then you sat down and it just wasn't coming together? So have you had that situation? And then if you did, how did you resolve it?
Oh gosh, that happens all the time. It happens more frequently than you might think. Like, I think I'll have it figured out, and then I go to write, and I'm like, it's not coming to me. So what I'll do usually is probably just take a break from it and walk away from it and just try to sit in the subject or the topic that I was going to write about originally. And then I'll probably, sometimes I go back and read my old poems because it'll just inspire me to see that it reminds me that you're able to write. Like I'm telling myself, you're able to write, you can do this, just take your time with it. And then I have to just come back to it when I'm ready. I just have to take a break. I can't sit there too long and stare at the page. I just have to get up and come back. But usually when I do that, I may not be able to get the whole entire piece written, but I am able to get it written in a structured way that I'm like happy with.
Mhm. How would you say per week, just roughly, how much time do you devote to your poetry?
And reading it, writing it, and all those
Uh,
different
uh, More so the writing.
per week, I would say that I choose a day out of the week. So for me, I have a lot going on in my life right now, just like things that I'm dealing with. So at this point in my life, I think I make sure that I write once a week. And that might be like I write 3 poems this day or three, it's multiple poems in one day of the week. A lot of the times it comes at night for me, like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. That always seems to be when I write. And then I'll always find myself writing something. So even if it's not a like 15-line poem or 20, it's always something. I can get a short poem out or a short poem that just expresses my day or something. But I do make sure that I get some writing out. And funny enough, I was looking at my journaling and I realized that I write my journals in a poetic style so that I go back and I'm like, this could be a poem just based on how I wrote it. Like I don't write like paragraph style. I write like it's a poem. So I kind of feel like I do write a lot during the week. But I guess if you ask me dedicating it to making sure it's a specific poem, it would be once a week.
Hmm. And do you have one main journal? Do you have a couple other journals, or are they kind of spread out around your place in case that moment comes where you basically get this inspiration? You know you got to write it down because or else you're going to lose it.
I definitely have so many journals. I have like, I can't even give you a number, but I definitely know it's like more than 6. And some of them are in my drawer, some of them are in my kitchen, some like it's just there. And then another thing I do sometimes, if I can't, like if I'm not next to a book, I just write it in my phone. I just write it down in my notes. And if I go through my notes, I probably have so many poems that I just forgot about just from writing it. Like if I'm walking or taking a walk, I write it on my phone if I don't have a book with me. So I always find a way to get it down somehow.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mhm.
Oh, all right. Well, we have a few more minutes here. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about your poetry, creative process, your influences?
Yeah. I just do want to like speak about one of my influences, my cousin Melissa. She, earlier I said I don't think I have, a person who's a poet in my family, and she slipped my mind, but she doesn't because she doesn't write as much now. But when I was younger, I used to always look up to her because she used to write, such beautiful poems when she was a teenager, and I remember that's part of why I started. Like I saw how it helped her. And that's why I was like, okay, in middle school, I can start this. And she's always been helpful just in my beginning process and telling me I could do it and telling me that, hey, like it might suck now, but you're gonna get better. You're gonna keep going. And I really do just want to say that about her. She's definitely very helpful. And I do want to talk about something that I think relates to why I write. I think I write about expressing, and I really am a person that believes in making sure that we talk about things that we may keep inside. So I also started a YouTube channel called The Deep Dive. And it's basically a podcast slash television style show where I talk about different topics and we just go deep into them to make sure that we're creating a space where we can have topics and discussions that can either heal people, free people, help people feel related to, etc. So I just think all around, I'm a person who's expressive, and I think that's why I'm a really great poet. And I'm really like looking forward to putting this book out and continue on with my show. I'm just excited for the talents I have. Yeah.
Yeah, we're excited for you too. You have your hands in a lot of different projects. We wish you a lot of success with that. You have a lot of insight and it sounds like you're doing some great things. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
No, thank you so much for having me.
We're gonna close in just a few moments. Is there any closing comments you'd like to share with us? And can you repeat again where we can find you?
Okay, so I'll just repeat the social stuff first. My poetry page is at Shana, SHANA Poetry. And I have a YouTube show channel called The Deep Dive, and you can find that on Instagram at The Deep Dive TV. And I just want to say that for me, I think writing has definitely saved me. And I think it's important for everyone to find something that allows them to be expressive and free. And I'm thankful that I found mine. That's what I would say.
Thank you. That was wonderful. We'd like to thank everyone for checking in with us today. We'd like to thank our guest poet, Shana Joseph. We wish you again a lot of success with all your endeavors. We hope you come back soon. We wish you good luck with your poem, your YouTube channel, Instagram, and whatnot. So thanks again for watching, everyone. Our very first episode of Poetry and Talk. We'll see you next time on Poetry and Talk. Until then, be well, be blessed. Thank you.